They tied her to the wagon wheel at first light, when the frost still clung to the ground and smoke curled gently from cabin chimneys. Eliza Bear stood with her back to the world and her heart bare. Wrists bound with rough rope that cut into her skin. Her dress torn and stained. Her lip split from a slap that had been delivered not in rage, but righteousness. That made it worse. It was not a mob's fury that brought her here. It was a town's quiet decision, a verdict whispered behind closed doors and then acted upon with chilling precision. She was not a criminal. She was a woman who had loved the wrong man. Talon. An Apache scout. A protector. A man whose silence spoke more truth than the town's sermons ever had. A man who had saved her life, and touched her soul. But none of that mattered here. Not in this town that called itself just, but drew its borders in blood and fear. The mayor stood before her, puffing out his chest, his voice loud and clear enough to wake even the stubbornest sleepers. "Let this be a lesson," he cried, and the boots began to gather, the good people of this God-fearing place drawn like flies to their own righteousness. "This," the mayor said, turning for all to see, "is what happens when a woman betrays her kind. When she lays with a savage." The words rang out like a gunshot. Shutters cracked open, doors creaked, children peeked around their mothers' skirts. The blacksmith wiped his hands on a stained apron and joined the growing crowd. No one spoke, no one stepped forward, but no one turned away, either. Eliza did not cry. She did not scream or spit or beg. That would have made it easier for them, wouldn't it? To believe she was broken. To believe she repented. But she held her head high, even as the wind bit into her skin and her arms trembled from the cold. She did not fight the ropes. Not because she had surrendered, but because she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her struggle. Her pride had been stripped already. Her dignity? Not yet. She met their eyes, every single one of them. The baker's wife, who once asked Eliza to help deliver her baby. The schoolteacher, who borrowed sugar and never returned the favor. The man who used to call her darlin' when she brought eggs to market. And her uncle, face red not with shame, but fury, because she had embarrassed him. Because her love had crossed a line he never dared even name. The silence grew thick, a curtain of judgment so heavy it nearly drowned her. And yet, beneath it, Eliza felt something strange, not shame, not fear, but clarity. Let them look. Let them see what it meant to defy them and still stand. She was not sorry. She would never be sorry. 3 nights ago, someone had followed her to the edge of the woods, where she'd met Talon beneath a moon-drenched sky. He had touched her hand. Nothing more. No kiss. No sin. Just fingers brushing fingers. But it was enough. Enough to confirm what they'd whispered about for months. Enough to convict her in the court of small-town purity. They had not needed a trial. Only an audience. The first stone struck the dirt near her feet. She didn't flinch. A man spat. Another chuckled under his breath. But still, she did not lower her head. She closed her eyes and saw Talon, not as they saw him. Not as a savage or an enemy, but as he truly was. The way he had carried her brother's body home after the Comanche raid. Though no one asked him to. The way he stood like the mountains, quiet, patient, unmovable. The way his voice had dropped to a whisper when he pressed his hand to her chest and said, "Strong heart, my heart." That memory was her armor now. She clung to it like a lifeline while the town tried to erase her. If love was a sin, then she was guilty, and she would carry that guilt with grace. She didn't look for mercy. Mercy, in this town, was a luxury afforded only to men with pale skin and bad tempers. But even they had rules. Tying a woman to a wagon wheel, no trial, no voice, no defense, was not about justice. It was about power. And power, she had learned, was always most fragile when exposed. So she made a vow to herself, silently beneath the crowd's breathing and rustling. She would not break, she would not forget, and she would never, not for one moment, let them believe that what they did was holy. They had brought her here to shame her, but she would be their mirror instead. Let them see what cruelty looked like in the morning sun. Let them reckon with the fact that she didn't look afraid, she looked unbroken. She stood not as a warning, but as a challenge. And when Talon came, because she knew in her bones that he would not find a woman weeping in the dust. He would find her proud. eyes forward, already halfway to freedom. It began with a sound, barely more than a whisper. A single hawk cried overhead, slicing the dawn with its sharp call. Eliza didn't lift her head, but something inside her shifted. Her heart recognized the silence beneath the silence, the kind that comes before a storm, or a salvation. Then came the hoofbeats, slow, deliberate, not the hurried thunder of a posse, not the careless clatter of lawmen. This was something else, a presence, a choice. She didn't dare hope, not truly, but her fingers curled around the ropes binding her wrists, as if her body already knew. And then, he stepped from the tree line. Tall, steady, wrapped in leather and shadow. His eyes, those river-dark eyes, locked on hers. And for the first time in hours, Eliza breathed. Talon. He said nothing, didn't need to. The crowd turned, startled. The mayor puffed up like a rooster. You got something to say, Apache? Talon didn't speak, didn't blink. He simply walked forward, each step echoing louder than the mayor's voice. Eliza couldn't stop the tears that welled in her eyes, not from fear. Not from pain, but from something purer, relief. She had held herself together through every insult, every sneer, every hateful stare, but now, as he knelt before her, unsheathing his blade, she felt her strength fold into his. The blade hissed through the ropes. Her arms dropped, limp and trembling, but he caught her wrists gently, as if cradling something sacred. He didn't ask if she was all right. He didn't scold or question. He simply said, I came. 3 words, enough to unravel all the agony the town had tried to weave into her skin. Eliza let the tears fall. Behind them, the sheriff's rifle clicked. You're making a mistake, Apache, he growled, stepping forward. This is treason. Talon didn't turn, didn't flinch. He stood slowly, positioning himself between Eliza and the town that had tried to crucify her. One hand hovered near his knife. The other rested lightly on her back. The sheriff sneered. You've got 10 seconds to leave. This is our law. And then Eliza found her voice. What law ties a woman up like livestock? She asked, loud enough to cut the air. What justice punishes love? No one answered. Not the mayor, not the preacher, not even her uncle. She looked around at the faces that once waved to her at the well. Once traded flour and stories. Once smiled at her in church. Now they were quiet, small, shrinking. I came here in grief. She continued, voice shaking. I stayed because I thought this place had a soul. But not one of you buried my brother. Not one of you brought him home. Talon did. A murmur spread through the crowd. But no one moved. No one lowered their guns. 5 seconds. The sheriff snapped. Talon turned his head slightly toward her. We go, he said gently. She nodded, breath catching. Her legs wobbled as she stood, but her spine remained straight. Together, they stepped backward, every stride daring someone to act. No one did. Perhaps it was the way Talon moved, fluid, powerful, as if he belonged to the land more than any man present. Or perhaps it was her face, lined with defiance and wet with tears that no longer spoke of shame. At the edge of the square, Talon let out a low whistle. From the hills emerged a painted mare, mane braided with feathers, hooves thudding softly against the frostbitten earth. He lifted Eliza onto the saddle with care, as if she were glass wrapped in fire. She clung to him, not out of fear, but because her body needed his warmth, his steadiness, his truth. They rode, away from the smoke, away from the stairs, away from the place that had tried to erase her. The forest opened around them, green and gold and trembling with life. Branches parted, leaves whispered. Eliza leaned her cheek against Talon's shoulder, dizzy with a strange combination of exhaustion and elation. For the first time in what felt like years, she was safe, not because she was hidden, but because she was seen. They didn't speak for hours. They didn't need to. The rhythm of the horse, the steady sound of Talon's breath, the wind in her ears, these were the lullabies of freedom. When they reached a creek at dusk, Talon dismounted and helped her down. She collapsed to her knees by the water, cupping it in shaking hands, splashing it over her face as if washing off the town's hatred. He crouched beside her, pulled out a small pouch, and dabbed ointment onto her wrists. His hands were firm but gentle, each touch careful, respectful, as if he were tending not just to her wounds, but to the soul underneath. "Why did you come back for me?" she whispered, voice cracking. "You didn't scream," he said, "didn't beg. That's how I knew you waited." Eliza looked at him, really looked, and the world blurred with something warmer than tears. "I thought they broke me," she said. "They tried," he answered, "but they didn't." He stood and unfurled a blanket near the fire pit, then pulled her gently toward it. As they sat, the stars blinked into the sky one by one. Not witnesses, not judges, just quiet companions. She leaned into him, her body still aching but her heart beginning to thaw. "I was afraid," she said. "I was too," he admitted. She looked at him in surprise. "I was afraid I'd come too late." She reached for his hand. "You didn't." He closed his fingers around hers. "I'll never be too late," he said. And in that moment, beneath the trees, beside the fire, in the arms of the only person who had come when everyone else walked away, Eliza Bear smiled. Not the forced smile of a woman trying to survive, but the real, unguarded smile of someone who had been saved. Not just from the town, but from the belief that she wasn't worth saving. The clearing welcomed her like a breath after a long storm. Tall pines encircled the space. Their shadows stretched long in the setting sun. A stream whispered nearby, clear and cold, and a thin curl of smoke rose from a low, thatched hut nestled beside a bed of moss and stones. The moment Eliza stepped into that clearing, she felt something shift, not just in her body, which still carried bruises and exhaustion, but in her spirit. It was as if the earth itself sighed in relief to receive her. Talon led her forward, his steps soft over the forest floor. He did not speak. He didn't need to. Outside the hut sat a woman, ancient and composed. Her hair was silver, braided into 2 long cords that hung over her shoulders, each decorated with beads that glinted in the firelight. Her skin bore the deep lines of time and trials. But her eyes, oh, her eyes, were sharper than the edge of Talon's blade. They watched Eliza without judgment, without hesitation, as if weighing her soul and finding it known. When Talon bowed his head and said, "She is strong, was hurt, needs a name," the old woman nodded once and motioned for Eliza to come forward. Eliza hesitated, heart pounding. She had not expected this. She had not expected anything. But something in the elder's gaze pulled her forward, gentle, steady, unshakable. "Come, child," the woman said in English that was rough around the edges but rich with rhythm. "Sit." Eliza knelt, folding her legs beneath her, and offered her hands. Unsure why, the woman took them without asking. She turned them over in her wrinkled palms, studying the rawness of the rope burns, the quiet strength still humming in her fingers. "You held on to love," she said, her voice low, even when it burned. She turned Eliza's hands over again. "But you did not let go of yourself. That is why you lived." Eliza blinked. Tears welled up again, but not from sorrow this time, from recognition. From being seen, maybe for the first time in her life. Not as a scandal or a disgrace, but as someone whole, someone worthy. "I didn't feel strong," she whispered. "I felt used, ashamed." The woman's voice firmed. "That is how they wanted you to feel. That is not who you are." She looked to Talon. "Does she choose you?" Talon did not speak. He didn't need to. Eliza met his eyes and, with her heart thudding strong in her chest, said without hesitation, "I do." The old woman smiled. "Then I give you a name." She closed her eyes briefly, humming under her breath, something like prayer and memory braided together. Then she opened her eyes and said, "You are Ynwitu, Springwoman." Eliza's lips parted. She didn't know the words, but the meaning landed like sunlight on her skin. "Why?" she asked, barely a whisper. The old woman touched her chest lightly. "Not because you are soft," she said, "because you returned, even after the freeze. Like spring, you came back to life." A tear slipped down Eliza's cheek, and this time she didn't wipe it away. "Thank you," she whispered. The woman nodded. "Names are gifts, but living them, that is the vow." That night, as stars shimmered above the treetops and firelight danced over the clearing, Eliza washed in the spring. The elder sang while she bathed, her voice made of memory and moss, and Eliza let the water carry away the last ashes of shame. She ran her fingers over the new bracelet on her wrist, a strip of hide painted with 2 symbols, a bird and a flame. Talon had tied it there himself. After whispering, "You are fire." Then, with a gentle motion, he had tucked a single white feather into her braid and said, "And I am winging." No preacher had spoken. No book had been signed. But something older than any vow had just been born. When Eliza lay beside the fire, her body wrapped in wool and her name wrapped around her like a second skin, Talon leaned close and said, "You have a name now. Not just one you were given. One you earned." She smiled. "Will you still call me Eliza?" She teased softly. "Only when I want you to laugh." He murmured. And in that moment, under a canopy of ancient stars, Eliza Bear, no, Wyan Witu, felt more alive than she ever had in her life. They left before first light, with bread wrapped in bark and blessings whispered into their backs. Before they departed, the old woman pressed something into Eliza's palm, a slender knife carved from bone, its handle wrapped in faded red sinew. "This is not for killing," she said. "It's for remembering. Use it only when something inside you forgets who you are." Eliza tucked it into the folds of her skirt, its weight against her thigh like a heartbeat. They rode not as fugitives, but as something reborn. Each hoofbeat was a note in a new song. Talon no longer led ahead. He rode beside her now, as if they were two halves of a single vow moving forward. The land opened to greet them, ridges marked by symbols, trees etched by time. Talon bowed his head as they passed the totems. "What do they say?" she asked. "That someone made it through before us," he said, "and someone after us will too." She smiled. Let the words settle into her bones. She had a name now. She had a home forming in the horizon. And for the first time, she understood. She was not just alive, she belonged. They saw the smoke before they smelled it. A thin black pillar rising like a scar in the pale blue morning sky. It twisted above the tree line in the direction they had come from, the quiet hollow by the creek. The hidden shelter they had built together with their hands. Their sweat. Their hope. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. "The camp," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They found it." Talon didn't reply at first. He stood still, listening to the wind as if it could speak clearer than any man. Then, with a slow nod, he confirmed what she already knew. They burned it. She closed her eyes for half a second. Not to cry, not to collapse, but to center herself, to feel the ground beneath her boots, the air in her lungs. "What did they think they'd destroy?" she said at last. "Our shelter," Talon replied. "Our peace. But not our choice." He looked at her then, long, steady, fierce. Something passed between them. Not fear, not even grief, just clarity. "We built more than a camp," Eliza said. "We built a vow." Talon nodded. "And fire can't burn that." They rode hard through underbrush and broken stone until they reached the edge of the valley where it had all begun. Smoke still curled from the embers, thick and bitter, coating the wind with the scent of scorched bark and ash. The cradleboard Eliza had made was gone. The shelter walls had collapsed into blackened timbers. The ring of stones where they had cooked their first meal now glowed with dying fire. But standing tall near the edge of the clearing was one lone tree, its bark singed but unbroken. Eliza dismounted, fists clenched, but her voice calm. "They thought this would erase us." "No," Talon said. "They hoped it would silence us." He moved to the charred remains of the blanket they'd once shared. Carefully, he picked through the edges until he found a scrap of hide. Half burned but still intact. With a piece of charcoal, he knelt at the base of the surviving tree and drew two symbols onto the hide, a bird, wings outstretched, and a flame. Then he added a single line joining them. "What does it mean?" Eliza asked, her voice low. "That we are not broken," he said. "That they can burn our shelter, but not our bond." He tied the hide to the tree's lowest branch, and as the wind picked up, it fluttered like a flag, not one of surrender, but defiance. "Will they see it?" she asked. "Yes." "Will they understand?" Talon shook his head. "No," he said, "but they'll feel it, and that's enough." They stood side by side, eyes locked on the ruin the town had left behind. The fire might have eaten wood, cloth, even memory, but it had only made the vow clearer. Eliza turned to Talon, her face lit with flame and fury. "They didn't come for justice. They came for pride. They wanted to shame you," he said. She shook her head. "They wanted to erase me." "And now?" They reminded me why I chose this. She looked around the ruined camp. Then to the hills beyond. They didn't stop anything, she said. They started something. Talon's brow rose slightly. What do you mean? I mean, she said, stepping toward the horse. We build again, but not hidden, not in silence. This time, we leave a mark so others can follow. By late afternoon, they had left the scorched hollow behind. The smoke faded into the horizon. But in Eliza's chest, a fire had taken its place, one she refused to extinguish. They stopped near a ridge marked with stone carvings and feathers. There, under a tall cottonwood, Eliza turned to Talon. I'm not afraid anymore. I know, he said. They can come with rifles. With torches. But they'll never touch what we made. Talon stepped closer. Because what we made lives in you. She met his gaze, unflinching, and in you. He reached into his satchel and removed a small bundle wrapped in deerskin. Inside was a second strip of hide, painted with the same symbols, the bird and the flame. For the next place, he said. She took it with reverence, tying it around her wrist with a steady hand. It's not over, she said. No, he replied. It's just beginning. That night, they found another clearing, smaller, quieter, but open to the stars. They didn't speak of what they had lost. They spoke only of what remained. Our vow, Eliza said, brushing ash from her skirt, wasn't made with witnesses. It was made with will. Talon nodded. And it still stands. He stoked a small fire and sat beside her. Close but not claiming. Steady but not demanding. We were never fugitives, she said. No. We were founders. Talon's eyes gleamed in the firelight. Then let's keep building. And so they did. Not from scratch, but from strength. The next morning, as sun lit the trail ahead and smoke no longer followed, Eliza looked back once, not with regret, but resolve. They think they burned us, she said quietly. But we are not ash. Talon replied. She reached for his hand. And he took it. No, she said. We are the fire. Spring came quietly in the hills. Not with fanfare, not with parades of color, but with the kind of hush that settles when the world finally exhales. The creek that had once run silent now whispered again. Shoots of green pushed through the charred earth. And overhead, birds returned, first one, then many, their wings like promises inked across the sky. Eliza stood at the edge of a field, skirt brushing the dewy grass, hands on her hips, surveying what they had built. A fence, rough-hewn and imperfect, surrounded a space no map had ever named. Smoke curled gently from a new chimney. The cabin was small, one room, a porch, and a roof stitched from timber and stone, but it was theirs. Each beam told a story, each nail driven by purpose. She glanced at the stone circle in the center of the yard, rebuilt. Stronger now, that was where it had begun again. The fire they lit after losing everything. The flame that refused to die. Talon stepped beside her, wiping his hands on a worn cloth. He had been chopping wood since dawn, and the scent of cedar clung to him like armor. He didn't say anything, he rarely did when words weren't needed. But when he looked at her, she felt the weight of it all, the pride, the resolve, the quiet satisfaction that they had made this life with bare hands and bared hearts. This is what they tried to burn, she said softly. He nodded, and failed. She smiled. We did more than survive. We became. They named the land Ashen Grove. Not in bitterness, but in truth. For what had burned. For what had grown back. Eliza had signed the deed herself, inked her name on paper delivered by a rider sent by the old woman. The land was legally hers. But spiritually it belonged to anyone who crossed its threshold seeking more than shelter. It was a place for the ones the world had tried to erase. And now, it was alive. Each morning began before the sun. Eliza would rise to knead dough, feed the birds, check the traps along the creek. Her hands were no longer soft, they bore calluses, scars, strength. She no longer rubbed her wrists to remember the rope, now she did so out of habit. A quiet gesture of reverence for how far she had come. She was no longer the woman tied to a wagon wheel. She was Witu, Springwoman, the one who returned. And she returned every day, with grit, with gratitude, with purpose. Talon was always nearby, sometimes hunting, sometimes mending, sometimes just sitting with his back against a tree, carving. watching her with the stillness of someone who understood that not everything precious must be touched to be held. They didn't speak of love often. They lived it. In the meals cooked together. In the tools shared. In the nights spent beneath the stars with firelight dancing across their faces. One evening, as twilight spilled gold through the aspens, Eliza stepped out of the cabin carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside, nestled against soft fabric, was a cradle board, hand-carved, polished with care. "It's finished," she said. Talon looked up from his carving, eyes narrowing gently. "For the child?" She nodded. "Not ours. Not yet. But someone will come. A girl with no shoes. A boy with no name. Someone will come. And we'll have room." He rose, walked to her, and placed his hands over hers. "You still burn," he said. "But not with pain," she replied. "With purpose." He smiled. "You gave that to yourself." "No," she whispered. "You just never looked away." That night, they sat together beneath the ridge where Talon's father had once brought him as a boy. Below them, the land rolled wide and green, untamed. Yes, but no longer unwelcoming. "Do you ever think about them?" Eliza asked. "The ones who tied me there. Who called you savage?" Talon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Sometimes, but mostly I think about the ones who haven't come yet. The ones who will need this place like we did." Eliza nodded, her gaze on the horizon. "Then let's build it," she said, "not just for us. For them." He pulled a folded cloth from his satchel, revealing a brittle paper, creased and worn. A land deed, signed, stamped. "How?" she breathed, tears pressing at her eyes. "The old woman," he said, "called in a favor. The judge owed her." Eliza touched the paper like it might vanish. "It's real. It's yours," Talon said. "To name." She looked out at the grove, where trees whispered secrets and the wind carried no shame. "Then I name it Ashen Grove," she said, "for everything we left behind. And everything we still carry." He took her hand. And with that, the vow was sealed again, not with ceremony, but with certainty. By the second moon of spring, the ground had softened. Grass covered what had once been fire-scorched dirt. A new path wound through the trees, marked with stones and feathers. A wooden post had been carved near the entrance. A bird. Mid-flight, above a flame, visitors began to arrive. First a woman with a child, her face hollowed by grief. Then a boy with eyes too old for his age. Then another, each one different, each one silent at first. But when they saw the symbols, when they saw the fire pit, when they heard Eliza greet them with nothing but warmth, they stayed. Not as charity, not as guests, but as kin. Ashen Grove was never meant to be a town. It had no church, no sheriff, no law books, but it had order, and it had love. Here, no one needed permission to exist. Here, no one asked who you used to be, only who you wanted to become. And beneath the cottonwoods, beneath the watchful eyes of Eliza and Talon, the forgotten began to remember themselves. Not in shame, but in pride. One dusk, as shadows stretched long and peace settled soft, Talon asked her, "What would your people call this kind of love?" Eliza thought for a moment, then shook her head. "I don't think they have a word for it." He smiled. "My people do." She turned to him. "Well, watching," he said. "It means the strength to believe something better is coming, even when there's no sign yet." Eliza's heart swelled. "Then we're not just lovers," she whispered. "We're believers." He kissed her, not like a man claiming, but like one returning home. And in that moment, beneath the trees, with the scent of bread on the wind and new footsteps approaching the edge of the clearing, Eliza knew one truth beyond doubt. They hadn't just built a home. They had built a legacy.